The heavy mahogany doors of the maternity suite didn't swing. They shuddered under the force of Sung Kwan's entry. Behind him, the frantic whispers of his security detail died in the hallway. Brielle sat upright in the hospital bed, her deep brown skin still glistening with the sweat of a 14-hour labor. She held the twins, two perfect, swaddled miracles, pressed against her chest. As he approached, she reached out, her fingers trembling toward the sleeve of his charcoal suit. "Don't touch me." The words weren't a plea, they were an execution. Sung Kwan didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the infants. He stepped back, the distance between them expanding like a physical bruise. He straightened his silk tie, his focused dark eyes as cold as the sea off Jeju. On the security monitor behind him, a silver sedan with tinted windows pulled into the hospital's restricted bay. "The discharge papers are signed," he said, his voice a flat, dead, horizontal line. "A car is waiting to take you to the secondary estate, not the main house. Until this is stabilized, you will remain out of sight." He turned his back, his shadow stretching long and dark over the cribs, leaving her behind before the first tear could fall. The rejection wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a dinner bell for the wolves. By publicly discarding his wife and newborn heirs, Sung Kwan has signaled a fracture in his ironclad succession. Now the board of elders and rival factions see a vacuum of power. If the king won't claim his throne's future, his enemies will, and they'll start by hunting the ghosts he just cast out into the cold. Brielle lay against the elevated bed, her body still vibrating from the battle it had just survived. Her natural curls, once something Sung Kwan traced with possessive approval, clung damply to her temples. The twins stirred softly against her chest, two heirs born into a dynasty that had just publicly distanced itself from them. Across the room, Sung Kwan stood motionless, the geometric tattoo behind his ear stark against his pale skin. He wasn't looking at her now. He was looking at his phone. It vibrated once. Then again. Elder Park. Vice Chairman Han. A message from the legal division marked urgent. He didn't answer, but the silence around him shifted. The security detail at the door avoided eye contact. One of them stepped half an inch farther back, as if instinctively widening the space between loyalty and liability. Outside the hospital, word was already spreading. Unstable succession, emotional miscalculation, weakness. By choosing distance over blood, Sung Kwan hadn't ended a problem, he'd created a vulnerability. She had not been removed. The car Sung Kwan had sent was a black Mercedes, tinted windows, no syndicate markings. Brielle stared at it from the hospital's side entrance for exactly 4 seconds. Then she turned and walked back inside. The hotel concierge at the Park Hyatt Seoul didn't blink when she arrived with 2 infants, a single overnight bag, and no reservation. The black card she placed on the marble counter had its own gravity. By the time the twins were settled in a suite on the 14th floor, corner room, reinforced door, 2 exits, Brielle had already called her own security contact, a man Sung Kwan didn't know about. One she'd been quietly cultivating for 8 months, the way you sharpen a knife you hope you never need. She sat in the armchair beside the bassinet and didn't cry. The city sprawled below her, indifferent and glittering. One of the boys made a sound in his sleep, a soft, involuntary exhale, and something in her chest tightened and held. Her phone buzzed once, a number she recognized as one of Sung Kwan's intermediaries. She set it face down on the table. On the street 14 floors below, a black SUV with no plates turned slowly into the hotel's service lane. It didn't stop. It didn't park. It completed the circuit and came back around, unhurried, like something that had already decided it could afford to wait. She noticed it on the 3rd pass. Brielle rose from the chair without rushing, moved to the window at an angle that kept her silhouette off the glass, and watched. The SUV's headlights were off despite the hour. Its idle was too patient for a delivery vehicle, too deliberate for a wrong turn. She stood there a long moment, one hand resting flat against the wall beside the curtain, her breathing even and slow. It wasn't Sung Kwan's fleet. His vehicles moved with purpose and disappeared. This one was watching. She stepped back, picked up her phone, and sent a single message to her contact. Plates, service lane, now. Then she checked the locks on the suite door, moved the bassinet 6 inches farther from the window, and sat back down. Her hands were steady, her jaw was set. The twins slept on, unaware that the world outside had already begun recalculating around them. Across the city, in the back of a moving car, Sung Kwan received the notification that his driver had returned to the hospital to find the Mercedes still sitting at the curb, untouched. His assistant said nothing. He looked out at the Han River, dark and wide and indifferent, and said nothing either. But his thumb moved once across his phone screen, pulling up the Park Hyatt's address on his map, and stayed there. The report landed on Sung Kwan's desk at 6:14 a.m. 3 pages. Surveillance photos, hotel registration, a copy of the black card transaction, and a name he didn't recognize attached to a security hire she'd made sometime in the last trimester of her pregnancy. He read it twice. His assistant, who had worked for him for 6 years and survived things most men hadn't, took one look at his face and found somewhere else to be. By 9 a.m., Sung Kwan was in the elevator of the Park Hyatt, alone, no detail. That was its own kind of message. Brielle opened the door before he knocked. She'd known he was coming, the front desk probably, or her contacts network. She was dressed, composed, one infant against her shoulder. She looked at him the way you look at weather, acknowledging, unimpressed. He stepped inside without being invited. The suite was orderly in the way that spoke of a woman who had been raised to make the best of diminished circumstances and had simply kept the habit. The bassinet was positioned away from the windows. He noticed that immediately, and the noticing cost him something he didn't name. "You were given specific instructions," he said. "I was." She turned back into the room, adjusting the infant against her shoulder with the ease of someone who had already stopped waiting for help. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was something more unsettling, the silence of a man recalibrating. He crossed the room slowly, stopping at the window, scanning the street below with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 2 decades identifying angles of exposure. "This hotel is visible from 4 adjacent rooftops." "I know." She sat down, settling the baby into the crook of her arm. She'd known he was coming, the front desk probably, or her contacts network. She was looking at him. She was looking at their son, smoothing one finger across the curve of his cheek with a tenderness so complete and unguarded that something in the room shifted. He opened his mouth. The red dot appeared on the nursery glass like a period at the end of a sentence. It held for 1 second, 2. Then it swept left and vanished. Sung Kwan moved before thought, crossing the room in 3 strides, his body between Brielle and the window, one hand on her shoulder pressing her down and back. She didn't scream. She curled over the infant and dropped, instinctive and fast, already protecting rather than panicking. He pulled his phone. 1 call, 4 words. The line went dead. The room was very still. Brielle looked up at him from the floor, the baby silent against her chest. Sung Kwan's hand was still on her shoulder. Neither of them moved. Outside, somewhere on a rooftop, a message had just been sent to him by someone who wanted him to know they already knew exactly where his ghosts were sleeping. He didn't ask her to come. He sent a car, a coordinator, and a single typed instruction that used the word relocated instead of protected. Brielle read it, set it on the hotel desk, and started packing. Not because he'd told her to, because the red dot had told her something he wouldn't. The east wing of the Osung mansion sat behind a secondary gate with its own security rotation. It had been used, she was told, for visiting dignitaries and high-value negotiations. The coordinators said this with professional neutrality. Brielle said nothing at all. She walked through the rooms, noted the reinforced window seals, the panic corridor behind the linen closet, the camera mounted at the hall junction that tracked on a motion sensor. She didn't ask who had ordered the nursery furniture assembled overnight. The answer was already making her feel something she couldn't afford. Sung Kwan didn't come to greet her. She hadn't expected him to. For 3 days, the wing was quiet. Staff moved at a distance. Meals arrived without interaction. The twins fed and slept and made the small, serious faces of people absorbing a new world. Brielle moved through the routine like a woman conserving heat, deliberate, contained, giving nothing away to the walls she suspected were listening. On the 4th morning, his assistant appeared at her door with a tablet and the expression of someone delivering a grenade wrapped in paperwork. The formal request from the Board of Elders was 2 paragraphs. The language was clinical. The implication was a blade. A paternity verification, they called it, a procedural necessity given the public ambiguity surrounding the legitimacy of the Osung heirs. Results to be submitted to the full Elder Council within 72 hours. Brielle read it once. Her jaw tightened, a single small movement, and then her face smoothed back out. She handed the tablet back without a word. She found Sung Kwan in the study off the main corridor, standing at the window with a glass he hadn't touched. He knew she was there before she spoke. She could tell by the stillness that moved through him, not relaxation, but the particular tension of a man bracing for something he deserves. "Did you know?" she asked. He turned. The geometric tattoo behind his ear caught the morning light. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind that didn't ask permission. "I received it this morning." "That's not what I asked." The silence extended. Outside, the garden was gray and wet. One of the twins made a sound through the monitor on her hip, a brief, searching cry that settled itself back into quiet. Sung Kwan set the glass down. "I will handle the elders," he said. "You'll handle them." Her voice was level, almost academic. "The way you handled the hospital, the hotel." She tilted her head slightly. "The way you've been handling everything except the thing directly in front of you." He said nothing, but he didn't look away, and that, she was beginning to understand, was the closest he came to admission. The fever came on fast, the way infant fevers do, without warning, without negotiation. By 10 o'clock, the smaller twin was burning, his face flushed and tight, his cry carrying that particular high, thin note that bypasses reason and lands directly in the chest. The house doctor came and went within the hour. "Viral," he said, "common, monitor through the night." Brielle thanked him in a voice that was steady and showed an out herself. She didn't sleep. She sat in the nursing chair with the baby against her chest, her hand moving in slow, continuous circles on his back, and she sang, low and unhurried, the kind of song that isn't really a song so much as a voice deciding to keep going. Siang Kwan had been on a call with his legal team when the doctor's report reached him. He ended the call without explaining why. He told himself he was doing a security walk. The East Wing had its own rotation, but patterns could be studied, gaps could be found, and after the rooftop incident, he had made it his business to walk the perimeter himself twice a week. This was simply Tuesday moved to Wednesday, that was all. He stopped outside the nursery door at 1 a.m. The singing reached him through the wood, not words he recognized, something slower, something that sounded like it had been passed down rather than learned. He stood with one hand raised toward the door handle and didn't move. The fever monitor beeped softly at intervals. The song continued, patient and unbroken, as if she had decided the night itself needed calming. He stood there for 4 minutes. He knew because he counted, without meaning to, the way you count things when you're trying to hold very still inside. Then he lowered his hand and stepped back. He was at the end of the corridor when his phone lit up, his head of intelligence. The timestamp was 1:07 a.m., which meant whatever it was hadn't waited for morning, which meant it was already past the point of management. Marcus Morgan, Brielle's younger brother, 23, graduate student, no syndicate affiliation, picked up outside his apartment in Mapogu 4 hours ago by two men connected to the Jiang Ji faction. No ransom contact yet. The silence was deliberate, a message delivered not in words, but in the simple, loud fact of what they'd taken and who they wanted to see panic. Xiangquan read it twice. Then he looked back down the corridor toward the closed nursery door, where the singing had just gone quiet, replaced by the soft, rhythmic exhale of a child finally cooling into sleep. He stood very still in the dark hallway. The Jiang Ji hadn't taken Marcus because they wanted money. They'd taken him because someone inside the syndicate had told them exactly how to make Brielle move. And the only way they would have known that is if someone inside the syndicate had told them where to look. Elder Park's name rose in his mind like smoke.
She found him at 7 in the morning, which meant she had held it through the night. That restraint made it worse. Sungkwan was at the dining table with his phone and a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and he looked up when she entered with the particular alertness of a man who had been expecting this and had not yet decided what to do about it. "Marcus has been missing for 18 hours, Brielle said. No preamble, no performance. I'm aware. Then I'd like to know what you're doing about it." He set his phone down. "It's being handled." The word handled landed badly. He saw it in the way her chin lifted, a single, composed degree before she spoke again. "You said that about the elders. You said that about the hotel. At what point does handled mean something actually happens?" "Brielle, he is 23 years old." Her voice was steady and devastating. "He has nothing to do with your war. They took him because of me, which means they took him because of you, and I am standing in your house waiting for you to act like that matters." Sungkwan rose from the chair slowly. "If I move on the Jiang Ji before I know where he's being held, they will relocate him or they will—" He stopped. "Or they will what?" It wasn't a question. The silence sat between them, full and honest and unkind. She picked up the bag she'd set by the door, small, already packed. "Then I'll find him myself. I have a contact who—" "You are not leaving this house. You don't get to exile me and protect me in the same breath." She moved toward the door and he crossed the room faster than she expected. Not grabbing, not blocking, just arriving. His hand pressed flat against the wall beside her head. She stopped. He was close, closer than the hospital, closer than the hotel floor, closer than any of the careful distances he had been constructing for weeks. She turned to face him and didn't step back. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved across her face with the focused, involuntary attention of a man who has stopped pretending he isn't looking. He didn't speak. The silence extended past the point of comfort, past the point of strategy, into something neither of them had names for yet. Then the explosion hit. It came from the east perimeter, a concussive thud that moved through the floor and up through the walls, rattling the windows in their frames. Sungkwan had her by the arm and was moving before the sound finished, pulling her back into the interior corridor, his phone already in his hand. Voices erupted through his earpiece. Smoke was visible on the East Garden camera, the gate, secondary entry point. His hand was still on her arm. She hadn't pulled away. "The twins," she said. Already being moved to the safe room, he met her eyes. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything about what that meant. He left without briefing her. No coordinates, no timeline, no promise of return. Just the sound of vehicles pulling out of the main gate at 11 p.m., and then the particular silence of a house running on reduced staff and held breath. Brielle sat with the twins until they slept, then sat a while longer in the dark because there was nothing else honest to do. Marcus arrived back at the mansion at 3 a.m. in a car driven by someone she didn't recognize.
He was bruised across the jaw and moving carefully, the way you move when your ribs have been reintroduced to you. But he was upright, and his eyes were clear, and when he saw her in the doorway, he made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She crossed the space between them and held him for a long time without speaking. He let her. She got him settled, got ice on his face, got him talking just enough to confirm he was coherent. Then she heard the second convoy return. She met Sung-kwan in the corridor outside the East Wing. The staff didn't. Two of them found reasons to be elsewhere before he reached the main hall. His head of security took his jacket and his weapon with the practiced efficiency of someone performing an old, unwelcome ritual, and disappeared. Sung-kwan stood in the corridor light in a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed back, and the blood on his hands and forearms was already drying to rust. He looked at her. She looked back and didn't move, and didn't flinch, and the not flinching was so visible in the stillness of her face that something in his posture changed, a fractional release, almost invisible, like a door that has been held shut for a very long time, giving a millimeter on its hinge. "He's here," she said. "He's okay." Sung-kwan nodded once. She crossed to the side table, poured water into a clean cloth, and held it out. Not a gesture of tenderness, a practical offer delivered without ceremony. He looked at it for a beat, then took it. He cleaned his hands slowly while she stood nearby, neither of them speaking. The mansion was very quiet. Outside, the garden was dark. His phone lit up on the table between them. She saw the name before he did, Elder Park, and beneath it a message that needed no decoding. Emergency session called. Full board, 9 a.m. Succession matter. Attendance is not optional. Sung-kwan read it, set the cloth down. His face returned to the flat, sealed expression she recognized from the hospital, from every room where he had been performing control rather than feeling it. But he was still standing close, and she was still there. "They're moving on you," she said. "Yes. Because of tonight? Because of the last 6 weeks." He looked at her then, directly, without the usual management in it. "Because I stopped being predictable." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of every decision that had quietly been made without either of them announcing it. The boardroom on the 43rd floor of the Osong Tower had no windows. That had always been intentional. No horizon, no exit, no sky to remind anyone inside that a world existed beyond the table. 7 elders, 4 senior directors. Elder Park at the far end, his hands folded with the patience of a man who had spent decades learning how to make power look like procedure. Sung-kwan had not told Brielle about the meeting. She was there anyway, seated 2 chairs to his left when he arrived, her posture composed, her expression the careful neutral of someone who has done their research and is waiting for the right moment to use it. He looked at her for exactly 1 second before he sat down. She didn't look back. Park opened without ceremony. The syndicate's stability required clarity of leadership. The public perception of internal fracture had created measurable damage to 3 active contracts. The solution the board was proposing was clean, legal, and final. A dissolution of the marriage, effective immediately. The wife and children to be relocated abroad, generously funded, quietly removed. He used the word generously twice. Sung-kwan listened with his hands flat on the table. Around the room, men who had spent years reading his silences watched him now and found nothing to read. Park finished speaking. The room waited. Sung-kwan looked at Brielle. She was watching Park with the attentiveness of someone cataloging rather than reacting. Her hands were in her lap. She had worn a dark structured jacket he hadn't seen before, and her hair was pinned back, and she looked not like a liability, not like a variable, not like the mathematical error he had once told himself she was. She looked like someone who had been underestimated so many times that she had learned to make a weapon of it. He was still looking at her when she spoke. "Before the board votes," Brielle said, her voice unhurried, "I think it's worth noting that the syndicate's 4 offshore holdings in the Cayman structure were quietly consolidated last week." She opened the folder in front of her.
into a trust. The primary signatory on that trust is not Oh Sung-kwan. She paused. It's his son's. The silence in the windowless room was absolute. Park's hands unfolded. That is not legal. She looked at him pleasantly. I had it reviewed. The charter doesn't prohibit spousal financial agency during an active marriage. She closed the folder. Divorce me, and you'll need the boys to release the assets. They're 11 weeks old. I'm their mother. I'm happy to discuss terms. The silence in the windowless room tightened. If you understand what just happened in this room, subscribe. This is where empires shift. Sung-kwan said nothing. He was looking at the table, and the slight tension at the corner of his mouth could have been fury, or could have been something that, in a different man, might have looked like pride. Park's eyes moved to Sung-kwan, waiting, demanding. Sung-kwan looked up, not at Park, at her. The vote, he said quietly, is tabled. The weeks that followed had a different texture, quieter on the surface, denser underneath. Sung-kwan began leaving documents on the desk in the East Wing study, shipping manifests, shell company structures, the organizational logic of the syndicate's legitimate holdings laid out in clean, annotated files. He never explained why. She never asked. She simply read them, and when she had questions, she left them on the same desk, written in the margins of his own notes, and he answered them the same way. And somehow this became the shape of their mornings. She learned fast. That didn't surprise him. What surprised him was the quality of her instincts, the way she read relationships between numbers, the way other people read tone of voice, the way she identified the vulnerable node in a structure before he'd pointed to it. Twice she caught something he'd missed. The second time, he told her so directly, without qualification, and watched her absorb it with the stillness of someone who had been waiting a long time to be seen accurately. The gala was a syndicate tradition, 40 years old, formally a charity event, functionally an annual measurement of who stood where. Attendance was mandatory for leadership. Sung-kwan had attended for 11 consecutive years alone. He didn't ask her. He had her dress sent to the East Wing 3 days before. She wore it in deep burgundy, her hair down, the geometric lines of the gown turning 3 separate conversations silent when she entered. Sung-kwan noticed. He said nothing, but he positioned himself beside her for the remainder of the first hour without making it look like positioning. They worked the room together with an ease that surprised them both. She handled the international contacts whose wives had been ignored by syndicate leadership for years, and he watched her turn those neglected women into a soft intelligence network in real time, collecting information through warmth that he could never have extracted through leverage. He caught her eye once across a cluster of guests. She held it for a beat, something close to amusement in her expression, and then turned back to her conversation. He was watching her from across the room when the waiter arrived at his elbow with a fresh glass. He reached for it, standard movement, automatic. Her hand closed around his wrist before the glass reached his lips. Not hard, just certain. She was beside him without his having seen her cross the room, her eyes not on him, but on the waiter, who had already begun a practiced drift toward the service corridor. "Don't," she said quietly. He set the glass down. His security lead was moving within seconds, silent and fast. The waiter didn't make the corridor. Sung-kwan stood very still, the untouched glass on the table beside him, and looked at Brielle. She was watching the exit, composed, already scanning. "How did you know?" he asked. "He didn't make eye contact with you. Your staff always do." The decision came to him at 4 a.m., the way real decisions usually do, not as a choice, but as a recognition. He was standing in the doorway of the nursery, something he had stopped pretending not to do, watching the twins sleep in the low amber light. The smaller one had his fist curled against his cheek. The other was sprawled with the total physical confidence of someone who had never yet learned to make himself smaller. Sung-kwan looked at them for a long time. Then he went to his study and began making calls.
The infrastructure took 72 hours to prepare. He moved quietly, the way he had built the syndicate's outer shell in the first place, through patience, through layered instruction, through the precise application of pressure at points no one else had thought to watch. Loyalists were repositioned. Evidence that had been held in reserve for years was packaged and routed to the appropriate places. The 3 directors who would move with him were briefed in separate rooms on separate days. Elder Park he saved for last. He was reviewing the final sequence in the East Wing study on the 3rd night when he heard something from the lower corridor. Not an alarm, not his security detail, but the specific absence of sound that meant something had already been contained. He found her in the basement anteroom. The man on the floor was zip-tied and conscious, a thin cut along his jawline suggesting he had made at least one decision he regretted. Brielle stood over him with Sungkwan's secondary firearm held in a 2-handed grip, her stance low and stable. She had clearly been taught once, long ago, and had clearly not forgotten. The man on the floor was looking up at her with the particular expression of someone who had badly miscalculated the parameters of their assignment. Sungkwan stopped in the doorway. She looked up. Her breathing was controlled. Her hands were steady. She held his gaze for a moment with something in her eyes that was neither apology nor performance, just a clear, level communication of fact. I handled it. Here he is. What do you want to do? He crossed the room, crouched in front of the man, and asked 2 questions in a quiet voice. The answer to both. Sungkwan stood, took the gun from Brielle's hands with a slow and deliberate movement, his fingers closing over hers for a moment before she released it. He looked at her. She looked back. "Park?" she said. "Yes." "When?" "Tomorrow night." She nodded once, the way she nodded when she had already considered all the variables and arrived at the same place he had. Then she looked at the man on the floor and back at Sungkwan, the question unspoken but exact. He made a small gesture to the operative in the corner. The man was lifted and removed. The room emptied. They were alone in the quiet basement, and the gun was in his hand, and she had been the one holding it, and neither of them said anything about how completely the distance between the hospital and this moment had collapsed. "After tomorrow," he said, "it changes. All of it." Brielle looked at him steadily. "I know. You'll be at the center of it, permanently." She didn't look away. "I already am."